Hi, my name is Michael, and my project topic is about cashless society. So, so here's a brief overview of the presentation. So I'm gonna go over an intro of the topic, and then the data sets that I used, and then the machine learning analyses that were conducted, and then draw the conclusions from the findings. So basically, the idea of a cashless society is a society in which physical cash, such as bills and coins, no longer exists, and all payments and transactions are digital. So, this is an idea that's being experimented with, and lots of prominent economists and governments across the world are trying to experiment with this idea of implementing new forms of currencies like central bank digital currencies, cryptocurrencies, and then online and electronic payments. So, as a general trend over past years, cash transactions have become more and more obsolete. Less people are carrying cash with them. In fact, a lot of businesses are no longer accepting cash as a form of payment. And in general, electronic payments are more convenient than cash. Um, Both for people and for businesses. They speed up transaction times. Businesses don't have to maintain the cost of transporting cash. Banks don't have to pay for ATMs and things like that. And then government and financial agencies can maintain a tighter control over the source of money, and they can crack down on illegal transactions, the shadow economy, tax evasion, and things like that. And there are definitely both pros and cons to both sides of the argument. So, some of the pros are that a cashless society would make it more difficult for money laundering and tax evasion, higher regulation over the shadow economy, and it'd also be generally more convenient, both for customers and businesses, like I said earlier. But some of the cons that are being argued against implementing a cashless society would be an invasion of privacy. Like people might not want um, third party entities and corporations having access to all their transactions and financial data. And they might see that as the government having too much control over things that they don't want them having control over. And another argument is that eliminating cash would hurt people who are unbanked, people in low income communities where cash is still the main way in which people use transactions over there. And then for the elderly and other communities, um, for example, for homeless people, where they mainly use cash in order to make transactions. And those are some of the cons that I was able to find about this topic. So the research goals that I'm trying to do is to discover what are the positive and negative aspects that are out there about the idea of a cashless society, and kind of discover what information is out there about it, and from scraping news APIs and websites to discover what people's opinions are about this, and kind of explore what is out there about this topic. So for this project, three data sources were used. web scraping from a couple websites that contain information about the topic, and then two news APIs, newsdata.io and newsapi.org, which contain info about headlines and news content that can be used for text mining and text analysis. So data cleaning was an important step that had to be done. So on the left is raw data, which is generally uninterpretable and contains a lot of junk text and unnecessary information, which was reformatted into labeled data, where the label was the topic label that was used in the search queries. So 4 topic labels were used: cashless society, virtual money, and digital money. And then these were labeled by words, and then, for example, count or TF-IDF score, and a couple other things. And then machine learning methods were implemented. So I'll start with association role mining. So one of the things that were found with association role mining is that the most popular roles were highly dependent on what news articles were trending at the moment when the data was gathered. So, for example, for quite a while, Nigeria was trending when connected to the topic search queries. And in Nigeria, um, they're implementing a central bank digital currency, and they were eliminating cash transactions, and that was trending for a while in a lot of the news headlines, and thus it showed up in the association rules. And then clustering didn't really find any statistically significant or meaningful associations. And then here's another example. So on the day when the APIs were accessed for this over here, in Switzerland, they were voting on whether to make cash a part of their constitution or something. And this showed up in pretty much all the association rules. And then latent Dirichlet allocation um, showed the most popular topics from the data. And these topics were highly dependent on what was trending in the news headlines and what was present in the data, just as with association role mining. So like over here, you can see that Nigeria is showing up again. And then naive Bayes produced the highest accuracy out of all the other models when it was used for label prediction. So the 4 labels that were used in the API calls. And then the decision trees, they were also used for label predictions, and they generally had a lower accuracy than the naive Bayes. And the decision trees that were produced were large and generally not very interpretable. So the only really meaningful thing that could be drawn from this was the label prediction. And then the neural network also had a high accuracy for label prediction, which was another interesting finding. And then the support vector machine was used to classify words by sentiment. And over here, you can see words with a negative sentiment on the left and positive sentiment on the right. So in general, both the news headlines and the web scraping, they contained more words that had a strong negative sentiment than a strong positive sentiment. So that was another interesting finding from this. So some of the conclusions that were drawn from this was that it was hard to identify patterns when the data sets that were used contained information from only a short time period, and that the information that was available fluctuated pretty significantly based on news developments and current events, and that the findings were highly associated with that. And then I redid some of these analysis with a data set that contained information gathered over several days. And for example, um, the models that did label prediction, the accuracy slightly increased. So gathering more data and over longer periods of time would help to increase the accuracy of the models. And then the articles, they generally contain a negative leaning sentiment about the topic, but the news headlines themselves were largely neutral, and it was hard to predict what sentiments were associated with which words just based on the news headlines. And then the highest accuracy for label prediction occurred with naive Bayes and with neural networks. So yeah, these are pretty much the main findings that were found with the machine learning methods. And yeah, I think that's all I have.